Tova Friedman interview. Take one, marker.
All good, though? Yep.
All right, now all yours.
Can you tell me where and when you were born?
I was born in a place called Gdynia, which is part of Danzig in Poland. Danzig is a city. There was half German, half Polish, and I was born in the Polish side of it, called Gdynia, in 1938, September 7th, which is exactly 1 year before the war. The war was September 1st, 1939. So I was exactly a year old when the war broke out.
So walk me through the order of events a little bit. When and how did you arrive in the ghettos, and for how long were you there?
In the ghetto, I was immediately, my parents went back home when the Danzig, around Kristallnacht, became extremely dangerous, very terribly anti-Semitic. My father had a business there, and he seemed to be doing okay, but not after Kristallnacht. He left to go home to his parents, and he found that they were, within a very short time, the whole family had to move to a ghetto. That means to a section of town, not an out where we lived, where they designated for the Jewish population. And I remember only being in the ghetto. I don't remember anything before. And I remember being under the table in the ghetto because there was no space for me to be anywhere else. And I remember little things, I was young, so it's hard to remember the death of my grandmother, because they came and they got her and shut her by the house. And I remember the death of my maternal grandmother. My paternal grandparents, my father came and he told my mother that he put them on a truck, and I knew where the truck was going because they were going to be shot. So I remember, I don't remember consecutively everything, but I remember different incidents because I was by then 3, 4 years old. I remember playing under the table with a little girl who came to visit. So I guess people could visit in the ghetto. I remember terrific hunger, and we were starving already. Beginning of starvation was at that time.
And then next is when you were brought to Auschwitz.
And that was it. I was about 4.5. And then they closed the ghetto. I told you what they did. They kept moving people from place to place in just the way they move soldiers where they needed from place to place. So they closed the Tomaszow ghetto after most of the people died of starvation and from cholera and typhus. Typhus was rampant, and we had no doctors because the Germans wouldn't come into the ghetto, and they killed all the Jewish doctors. So then they closed that, and they took most of the people went to Treblinka, and we went to this labor camp. 36, 37 people. I don't know. I don't know the number. My father said 36, but then I heard somebody said 50. I don't know.
And how long were you in the labor
In the
camp before
in
you
the labor
eventually...
camp. Well, in 1944, there was in 1943, about a year. In 1943, the ghetto was closed, so we went to the labor camp. And then in 1944, they took us, they closed the labor camp. See, again, they closed the camp and they sent us to Auschwitz. It was like for the final solution. They were doing it as quickly as possible. That's when they increased because they were afraid of the Allies. And they the whole plan was to leave no witnesses. So every Jew and every person in any of those death camps had to be killed. So they took us to Auschwitz, to Birkenau, which was only one purpose in Birkenau, murdering. They didn't even work there. You waited for your turn to be killed.
Can you tell me a little bit about the day that your mother found you in the camp? Did you have any sense of certainty that she was still alive even?
No, well, I did hear her. You know, I heard her calling me. I didn't see her. I heard her. And I didn't know that by time passing, I can't remember. I didn't know, you know, children, I don't think know time that well. But all of a sudden she appeared. That was already when the person who watched us disappeared also. It was almost it was almost when the Allies were on their way, and so she could get into our barrack. Otherwise, she couldn't have got into the barrack. She would have been shot. Can't go out to a different barrack. And had trouble recognizing her. She looked terrible, terrible. I think it was my mother, the way I remembered her. I have not seen her for quite a while, and I didn't remember her. But she convinced me she was my mother. Didn't take long. And then she snuck me out. She had the plan, which I didn't know about. Took me to infirmary of women. But I remember her holding me very tightly because outside there was chaos. Just to make it from our barrack to what's, I guess she thought it was a safe barrack. You didn't know you could make it. They were shooting. You see, the Germans were walking around with guns, shooting everybody who didn't get into the line fast enough. They were lining up everybody to leave Auschwitz. They were going to walk them to Germany because they didn't want to leave them as witnesses. By then, it was chaos. They were the dogs were barking. They were shooting. They were anybody who didn't get, and we didn't want to go on that line. My mother said that she will not survive on that trip. She knew it was very far, she said to me, and it was snow outside. And she said, look at me. She was just, her feet were swollen, her stomach she looked terrible. She said, she had no shoes. She had like rags. She said, I'm going to die on the road. And then she looked at me, she said, you know, you could survive that trip. You could maybe walk. And then she said these words, I don't want you to live alone in this world. I don't want you to survive by yourself. I want you to die with me here. Will you die with me in Auschwitz? I said, yeah. She thought she'd be shot, you know. You can't just decide not to go on that line because everybody who didn't go fast enough was shot. But we snuck out, and we were walking near the barracks, very close to the barracks. We shouldn't be seen. And we came to this hospital, infirmary, and I remember she took my hand, held it very tightly, and she went from corpse to corpse. Didn't know what she was touching, all you women, until she found the corpse she liked. I looked at the corpse. It was a woman, warm. She could manipulate her body because the woman must have died minutes earlier. She said, get in. She helped me. She took off my shoes. And she manipulated my body in such a way. I knew exactly what she wanted. She put my head under her arm right here, armpit. But my mouth into the ground, my face to the ground. My head was here. And then she put my legs, one in between the woman. She was manipulating it. And then she covered. But the woman's hands were out. And the blanket was up to her chin, but her hands were out. She took them out. They were like this. I could feel it, you know, because my head was right here. And she said, try not to breathe much. Nobody will uncover you. Don't uncover yourself no matter what happens. And she disappeared. And I know what she wanted. So I started breathing very shallow into the ground, into the bottom. And then I heard the screaming and yelling, haraus, haraus, out, out. They were coming. People were everywhere, and they were shooting those who were dying. Now, that doesn't make sense to anybody. But by then, nobody was in the right mind. The Germans were not in their right mind. They wanted to just get out, run away before the Russians came and take as many people with them and kill those who stayed behind. So they started walking all around, and somebody stopped by my bed. Wanted to make sure that the dead person was really dead. Otherwise, they would shoot that person, that woman. And I remember I stopped breathing. I was afraid the blanket would move. By luck, the person moved on. I could hear the boots. I couldn't have kept my breath any longer. And even then it was very shallow after the person left. And screaming and yelling. Oh, I remember that, and shooting. And then there was quiet, but there was smoke. And then I said, oh, my mother said, I can't get uncovered. I can't breathe. But I would not uncover myself. I knew she was right. I knew if I listen to her, I'll survive. I'll make it. So I didn't uncover. By the time I couldn't hold anymore, she uncovered me. And these were her words. They're gone. Just like that. In Yiddish. They no longer here. And I looked around. So many people had also hidden with corpses. And in order to get out of bed, they pushed the corpses off the bed so they can get. I didn't, because my mother took me out. The corpse was still on the bed. She helped me out and to put my shoes on, but I couldn't find my shoes. I don't know what happened. So I was barefoot. And all these people with the corpses all over, and then the place was burning. That's how it was, the smoke. They had set the infirmary on fire. And then we walked out with everybody outside, and lots of people were walking. It was dark, and there's snow, and I was wearing I don't know what, but I remember walking towards the gates. And there was January 25th. The Russians came January 27th. But the January 25th, the Germans had gone already. They left 2 days before the Russians came. So that's how we were liberated.
So January 27th, 1945. What do you remember about that day?
I remember, you have that picture with my showing my number to the Russians. All I could see is a different uniform, which I never knew before, screaming and yelling in Russian because they had trouble with the electricity. Something, people always made noises and screaming, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what they were screaming. But once they got us, they saw the children. They were kissing all of us. One Russian soldier picked me up and threw me in the air. And I remember looking at my mother. I was at my mother, and she smiled. So I knew it was safe. That was a day of liberation.
So you've spent your life reckoning with the legacy of the Holocaust and your memories of it, but it was only in more recent years that you began discussing your experience more widely through social media and your memoir. What motivated you to share your story in this way?
Well, I really started it when I was already in my 50s. I didn't do it right away because nobody wanted to hear it. I started speaking when my oldest daughter was in high school. And the teacher asked the class if anybody knows anyone who's a Holocaust survivor, and my daughter asked me, and that's how I started speaking. I did not speak before. And I realized how many people know nothing about it. And I always felt that since I survived against all odds, I shouldn't really be here, that it was my obligation to keep the memory of those that were murdered alive. And once I started talking, it was like a floodgate opened, and I spoke to anyone who wanted to hear it. Anyone, anytime. And I've been doing it since.
It's been almost 80 years since the concentration camps were liberated. Why do you think anti-Semitism continues to persist in the way that it has?
75 years, about, yes. I don't know. It's very scary. I think what's happening in our world, it became people are frightened about all kinds of things. I mean, the COVID frightened everybody, and so many people lost loved ones. The world does not seem safe. And once, that's my opinion, and once the world isn't safe, people are looking for scapegoats. And somehow, throughout the years, the Jews became scapegoats. And that's what's happening right now. And it's very scary for me. And I talk even more than I used to, maybe to see what effect I would have on those people who feel hatred towards my people.
There's a lack of understanding and education about the particulars of the Holocaust, and then there's just flat out denialism. How do you begin to comprehend such a phenomenon, and what can we do to fight back against it?
I completely ignore the deniers. Because, you know, I always think I'm a therapist. So I think if I were to go to a mental institution and somebody would tell me that they are king, will I believe that they're king? Will they deny that they're king? No, to them they're kings. So therefore I think of these deniers as people, who knows, deranged or don't read history or don't understand anything. I just ignore them altogether. But that doesn't mean that I will stop speaking. And what bothers me is not the deniers so much, it's the people who are ignorant, who don't know, who are intelligent, who are kind, who are good people. They just don't know. You know how many people have never heard of Auschwitz or anything? So I think that's where I'm concentrating on. I don't want to do anything. I don't want anything to do with the deniers.
You're 85 years old now. I don't think anyone would blame you for retiring or taking some time to relax. What keeps you going? What do you see as your mission?
It's not only my mission, it's my attitude towards living. I don't understand what relax means. I am relaxed. I mean, I'm relaxed when I have clients, when I speak to people like you and tell my story. I just want to be effective and useful until the very end of my life. And sitting on the beach is not my personal answer to relaxations. I can understand other people love it. And I could go to the beach once in a while, you know, but that's not my idea of how I want to spend my time. I sort of think my time is a gift. I told you, I feel like I shouldn't be here. 1.5 million children were murdered. My whole town, most of the children were murdered from my town, hundreds of them. 5 survived. So I have that feeling I should do something with that time to the very end, really. If I stay healthy, hopefully.
I want to take things back quite a ways. What was your family's life like before the Holocaust?
Well, you know, I wasn't there. I was born a year before the Holocaust, but my parents told me about it because they always hoped to reconstruct their lives, especially my mother, who came from a very Orthodox Jewish family, from a dynasty. They were Hasidim, very Orthodox, and she talked about the wonderful life they had in a town called Tomaszow Mazowiecki, boasted about 15,000 Jews before the war. It was about 1/3 of the population, and they had complete freedom before the war. They got along very well with the non-Jews. And my mother studied, and my father loved music and singing and dancing, and they had wonderful Sabbath dinners, very large families. My mother came from 150 people, 9 brothers and sisters, and they all had children. And you know, it was like religious people believe in having children. And my father comes from 8, and also with a lot of children. And nothing was left after the war. But they always talked about their families with nostalgia and with terrible guilt that they survived, especially my mother, who was the only survivor.
So is it safe to say that you have no memories of life before the camps?
No, none at all. No. My memories started at the age of 2.5. And that's only sporadically, because there's certain things that are so unforgettable that even a child who can't express it verbally, I expressed it later on. I knew what was going on. It was very an abnormal time.
So, entering the camp, do you have any memories of walking through those gates for the first time?
There are many different type of camps.
Right.
The first camp, I don't remember. The first was the ghetto. That means they rounded us all up and they put us in a tiny apartment and so forth with rules and regulations and so forth. I have memories not entering but living there, because I lived there till I was 4.5. Then came the labor camp. That I remember very well, going to a labor camp where my parents worked a whole day. And then, of course, was the Auschwitz. That was very memorable. We got on a terrible train, got off the train, and there we were. That's my memories start from entering the labor camp in Auschwitz.
Tell me a little bit more about that then, entering Auschwitz for the first time, that train ride and entering those gates for the first time.
There were very few children left, if any. I don't think there were any except myself, because they had taken, you see, in each place I was, the first thing they did was kill the children and the elderly for all kinds of reasons. So by the time we came to the labor camp, there were very few children left. And the labor camp was where the parents worked a whole day in factories to help the war effort in ammunition factories. And they still took the children away to kill them. And I was hidden at that time when the selection came, so that I was one, or maybe out of 2, I don't know, children that went on the transport to Auschwitz. I remember that very well, because that was the first time that my mother and father were separated. Till then, we were as a family, 3 of us. My grandmother was killed, everybody else disappeared or were killed. We didn't see anybody, but we were there. I knew my mother, my father, and I was part of their lives. And then entering the cattle car, my father was taken away with men, and I was with women, with my mom. And remember my mother helped me on it because it was very, very hard to get on. And then I remember the ride. It was 36 hours. I didn't know it was 36 hours. I found out later. And I remember it very much. I mean, it was, by then I was 5.5, but I was an adult 5.5. I wasn't an American 5.5. I was a different type of a child. And it was very hot, so we were sweating because there were so many women all together. And I remember my thoughts, and the worst thing was I had to go to the bathroom, and I didn't know how. I couldn't move, and I kept saying, Mom, Mom, I need to go. I don't think she even heard me. There was so much noise and screaming. And then I realized everybody was going where they stood. So did I. That was very hard for a child to realize. Just go. And you could hear the smell and the thirst. There was nothing to drink and nothing to eat, and very dark. The whole place was dark, except there was a little window, but we did let in some light. But as I was small, the light never reached me. So I remember standing there and falling asleep on somebody else's back, like a woman. Even her back was perspired, and I just put my head down. And my mother was holding me around a whole time until we arrived. I remember that very well. Screaming, the smell. You know, smells, something that stay with you forever. And I smelled the kettle car. People were throwing up. They had dysentery. See, I knew I was going to Auschwitz, but I don't know if I knew what death was. I knew it's a place you don't come back from, but I didn't know what exactly. The adult women knew, so they were like screaming and crying and so forth. So I remember that very well.
And then entering Auschwitz for the first time, what do you remember about that?
Oh, yes, you can't forget that, because it was, you see, entering, when we got on the kettle car, we didn't have a platform. My mother had to pick me up and put me in. Arriving, there was a platform, so we could go down. And I remember the light, all of a sudden the light. But the thing that I saw most of all were the dogs. I've always seen dogs. You know, the German Shepherds, to this day. I live near a dog park right now, and each time they pass my house with the German Shepherds, I know they're wonderful, smart dogs, and these are my neighbors, but it's a terrible feeling. And I remember the German Shepherds, they were very close to me because they were right by the train as we got off, and I still remember their saliva, and I was tall enough to look straight into their eyes, and they looked at me. And I remember saying to my mom, I'm going to be killed by them. And she said, no, they're trained only to kill if you run, and you're not going to run. So the entrance, the first maybe hour or so was very, very memorable. There was a smell. I said, what's the smell? And she pointed to the chimney, and I knew what she meant. They were the burning of the bodies. After they would gas them, they were burning them. She never hid anything from me. And then they made us undress. All that, she said, get undressed. I said, why? Why am I going to get dressed? She said, because they want to check that we're healthy. If we're not, she pointed to the smoke. I knew right away. You know, I've been so conditioned to know life as it was that she didn't even have to say sentences. She just had to point. I knew what it was. And then they took us and they cut my hair. They took away my clothing, cut my hair, shaved my head. You know, it's interesting. Entering the kettle car, you were still sort of human. You went as a fam. I was with my mother, and I had my own clothes, my own shoes. I had my hair. I looked like skinny, hungry, but like a person. That was a point where you separated. You stopped being a human being. You entered a person, and you walked out on the other side, because that's how it was, you know. You enter here, and then you I don't know how it was, but another door opened. You were not a human being, and after they shaved you, your hair, and gave you some clothes, you were no longer yourself.
What do you remember about being separated from your parents? And did they impart any wisdom onto you about survival before you parted ways?
Well, my father was separated quite early. My mother much later, because I was in Auschwitz with her. My mother taught me survival all the time, from the time I was 2 or 3. You don't cry because you make noise. So I knew not to cry, no matter what happens. When I was hidden in the labor camp, I saw what was going on. She had put her hand on my mouth, although she didn't have to. But she was afraid I'd make a noise. I didn't. I learned not to cry also in the labor camp. I was alone the whole day with other kids, running around because she was working, my father was working. So she taught me never to have eye contact with a German soldier because it meant recognition. She taught me to be invisible at such a young age, and I learned it. When she taught me not to run. That's why she said to me, the dogs won't kill you because you're not going to run. I said, no, I won't. She taught me that when you see a German coming towards you, you stand very still. You don't move. You lower your eyes. You put your hand on your back of you. And if you have a hat on or kerchief, you take it off. So she taught me to become invisible, really, from the very beginning. Later on in Auschwitz, she gave me new lessons. She talked to me constantly, knowing that one day I'll be alone and I won't know how to survive. But I did. She taught me right away. You know, she anticipated things. Well, they shave my hair. Okay, shave my hair. I was very unhappy. My braids were lying down and I was standing naked in all that hair. I didn't say anything. They took my clothes. I didn't say anything. But she taught me in Auschwitz that you have to learn to control your bowel movement because you can't go to the bathroom anytime you want to. I now realize it's a luxury to go to the bathroom anytime, you know? But I had to go with adults twice a day. And I learned. I said, Mom, I won't be able to hold it in. She said, yes, you will, or you'll be shot. I learned. I learned also to take care of my bowl. You know, they give you a bowl out of a tin and a cup. You can't lose it, or somebody else will use it and get your rations, because you get no rations if you don't have a bowl. Nobody stole my bowl. I hid it so well. I watched it. You learn not to cry. And when I get very sick, I learned to keep it to myself, even from my mother, because I knew that sick meant death. I could see. They would take these people who were ill and take them away. I knew where they were going. There were lessons all along.
So during even the most brutal wars throughout history, children have often been spared, but children were particularly vulnerable during the Holocaust, as you mentioned, along with the elderly. Why was that?
Well, first of all, the children were targets, and they knew it. I knew I was a target. My mother would tell me, they're going to kill you if they see you. So the being invisible meant the only way you could sort of be saved. And then physically, you know, they were susceptible to diseases. Oh, by the way, I had scarlet fever and diphtheria in Auschwitz, and I survived, which it in itself is a miracle, absolute miracle, without any medication, because there were no doctors. Children knew that they were being slayed, that they're going to be the first to die. They knew it. You could see the children going to the crematorium. And they were first one to starve without food, without anything. Typhus was very big, and the kids died like flies from typhus and from starvation. Even those who didn't work. You just lie someplace and you die.
Were you able to maintain a sense of your own personal identity at all during this time, or was that completely stripped away from you?
I don't know what that means, identity. I still don't know. No. the thought was, all I want is a piece of bread. Maybe I can eat soon. Maybe I'll find something in the garbage. I didn't even, when I was separated from my mother, I didn't even miss her. I forgot. Nobody had mothers. Nobody had fathers. I thought that's the way people have to do. Life is like that. I even dreamt in Auschwitz about food. I just dreamt about food. I thought about food. That's all there was. When they called the kids to line up to be tattooed, I fought to be one of the first kids. I thought it was food. I said, oh, they're calling us to line up. It must be something to eat. And when they tattooed me, I didn't make a sound. So you learn, but you have to start very early to learn these things. Those kids who probably entered the war later, like they were till 4 or 5, they had a good life, and all of a sudden had a harder time. I learned from the time I could remember, from my memory time.
You mentioned your tattoo. All these years later, you've chosen not to remove it. What do you remember about getting that tattoo, and why have you kept it?
Well, there was a time when I told you I thought it was food. So I fought a girl in front of me. She was a year older, so she won. And she was from my hometown. And for the rest of my life, she killed herself, by the way, years later. She gassed herself, can you believe it? But I knew her tattoo. And each time I told her, I said, you got a tattoo ahead of me because you fought me. But when my turn came, there was this lovely young woman. The reason I say lovely, because she was very kind to the children. And as she was tattooing, she tattooed she had like a sheet, because each one had to have a certain number. And that number was designated for my name. So I remember looking, and it was like she put a needle into ink, and it's in each dot. And I remember looking at it. It hurt, but I was more interested in looking at it than the pain. And she said to me like this, when she finished, she said to me, do you know what this is, this number? I said, no. She said, 27,633. And I didn't know what she was saying, because I couldn't read or write. I didn't know that this corresponded to numbers. By the way, it took me years to learn numbers. I learned alphabet easier than I learned numbers. I must have had some kind of a psychological thing against numbers. So she said, if you don't remember that number, you're going to die. So I said, say it again. I think it was in Polish, but I can't remember. So I memorized the way it sounded. I didn't know the correspondence of 8, 9, 7. I was just a word. And then she said, she gave me a rag. She put it in cold water. I put it in cold water. And she said, press very hard, because if you rub, it's going to swell. This way, if you press, it's not going to swell and it won't hurt so much. And you know what I said to myself? What a nice lady. She doesn't like doing what she's doing. All the kids were tattooed, and after that she disappeared. She was Jewish, and she was killed after her job was done. So I memorized my number. It's again, you do what you do, that which will help you survive. That's what you do.
All these years later, you've chosen not to remove it. You've kept that tattoo.
Right.
Why is that? Why was that important to you?
I always, something, I had a fantasy. One day I'll meet Hitler and I'll kill him or something. It was like with me, there was an inner anger against what was done. And one of the things, I think, a doctor offered to take the number off. And I said, no, I did nothing wrong. It was it was a symbol of what was done, and I wanted to make sure that the world knows. Even as a kid, I wasn't embarrassed by it. I mean, some people, I know two people who took the number off. They felt they couldn't look at it every day. You know, I'm going to tell you something weird. I feel it, although it's not possible. I feel it. Like when the GPS says to me, turn left, I said, oh yeah, that's my number. That's my left hand. It's just with me. It's something I don't want the world to forget, because if you forget that all those 1.5 million children will be nobody even knew they existed. But if I talk about it, they exist. They existed.
You mentioned the other children at the camp. What was your relationship like with the other children?
Very little. When I first arrived to that barrack, because before I was with my mother, to the children, I saw two that I knew from the previous labor camp and from my hometown, and then they disappeared. I asked them after the war what happened. Apparently their parents, their mother came and took them out and took them somewhere else. I don't know the process, how that happened. But one of them, her name is Ruth, or Rutka in Polish, she's the one who committed suicide. I knew her, but there was no relationship between us. Don't forget, we were starving. We heard shooting outside. We knew what was going on. And at one time we even went to the gas chamber. I didn't have any relationship. But what I did do, which I'm still a little bit feel bad about that, there was like a stove, like out of bricks, but it was for warming, because the winters in Poland are very cold. And they were a little bit warm, so I loved to go on them barefooted, just to keep my feet a little warm. But I would do it in the middle of the night, because I couldn't sleep. And I would frighten the other children. I met this friend of mine, Rutka. She said, I have a question to ask you. Do you remember a monster would walk around on that stove? Like when I woke up in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I saw this face and this. I said, oh no, Rutka, that was me. Can you imagine? She said, oh no, it took me years to talk to a psychiatrist about that. I said, I'm sorry. I had this thing, I don't know, like a type of a fearlessness. You know, I still have it. It's like, I'll manage. So I went around at night making faces, scaring the other children, which I'm not proud of. In fact, I feel very guilty about that.
What was the day-to-day life like for children at the children's
There
camp?
wasn't a day-to-day life. Starvation. We did go for walks, though, once in a while. I remember walking out in a group, 2 by 2. We had partners. I don't even know who my partner was. And then I remember seeing frozen bodies on the ground. I had to walk around it because, you know, there were corpses everywhere. And they didn't always, the Sonderkommando, which were the people taking care of corpses, didn't have time always to pick up the corpses. At one time, I was always at the end. I really don't know why. I saw a little, like a I don't know, a barrack, and it had a door there, ajar. So I left the group, and I looked in, and I saw corpses, cut up corpses, from the very bottom to the very top. I said, oh, that's why they keep so many corpses here. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't upset. That's what life was like. You kill people, and then you burn their bodies. If you don't have time to burn their bodies, they're around every place you go. So step around. You don't step with corpses.
Tell me a little bit about the living quarters. Paint a picture for me, the sights, the smells, the sounds.
The living quarters was just a barrack with very little light. There was light on top. Everything was on top. I changed, and I don't know why. At one time, I had the very bottom. There were 3 tiers, and sometimes I had the very top. They must have told me to change. I don't remember why, who said what to me, and I don't remember the language. You woke up in the morning after you were, and at night you didn't go to the bathroom. You made in big pots that overflowing everywhere. So in the morning, each child would try to clean up a little bit, their own whatever, and then I think you could wash. They would take you to a place where a communal wash place, winter, summer, very quick. Then you went to the toilet, which the toilet was like slabs of wood, cut like thin, and big holes in it. At one time I fell in when I was with my mother still, because they were gigantic holes. And I couldn't hold on, so I fell in. And when you went back, they gave you something to eat. You were fed twice a day. And the rest of the time, you just wanted to think about food. Sometimes you went for a walk. There wasn't anything. Oh, they counted you. With my mother, before I was tattooed, there was called appel. You stood outside, you counted for hours. With the children, we were counted inside. We didn't go outside. But they counted us by numbers. They called out the numbers. And I had a bed maid, and she died. She was 12. To me, she was so old. I wasn't worried that she died. I knew she would die because I could see her starvation signs. Kids would say, she's got 3 weeks or 2 weeks. She's going to die. The word was peigern. Peigern is a Yiddish word that means it's like street dying. It's like a street person that sort of disintegrates. It's not a nice death, like a dog that people forget to feed, dies on the street somewhere. So that's the word. So I would say she's going to die like that. So I worried that they're going to call her number, but I knew her number because I heard it so much. So I remember pulling her by her feet to the spot in the front where all the kids had died that night. But she was my responsibility. She was in my bed. And then I said, oh, she's here, she's here. I knew her number. I was so proud of that. Because otherwise they would call. Nobody's answering. We would get punished. What if she ran away? I don't know how she could run away. But they were like irrational if somebody was missing, completely irrational. They would punish everybody. So I averted the punishment by knowing her number and pointing to her. She died. I knew she would.
You've mentioned a few times the starvation, that overwhelming starvation. Can you tell me a little bit more about that feeling
There
of
is
hunger?
no way for you. It's one thing I have to tell you. You have to be there. There is no way. There is no way to describe what happens to your mind and your body when you're deprived of food for a very long time with no hope of getting any. I mean, it takes over. Because what happens, I don't know much about the medical thing, but the body begins to eat itself. Because, the hormones and everything functions a little bit. So everything inside, I don't know what happens to you. But you have to die. And the death by starvation was so common. But before that, there comes a period where you don't want to eat anymore because death is there already. You're gone. But before that, that's all you can think about. Somebody once said, I don't remember, it's not my quote, somebody else has said, how did God look to you And the person said, a piece of bread. You know, I got a gift from my mother on my 6th birthday. It was a piece of bread. I think she died because of that years later, because she stole a potato, she bartered it for a piece of bread, because you know I could eat raw potatoes, but it's better to have bread. And she was beaten because they found out that she stole the potato. Her head was beaten. And years later, she died from it. She said she had a terrible headache and she died. She was 45 in America. But meanwhile, she gave me this present, and it said, I didn't know I had a birthday or anything. It said, Tola, happy 6th birthday. I couldn't read. Somebody, one of the caretakers who were there, read to me. And then, being who I am, I saved it. Because to me, life wasn't so terrible. I expected it to be worse. And I had this fabulous image, because I saw everybody dying around me. I said, not going to happen to me. What's going to happen to me is, I had this image. I was going to be dying, just about to expire. And then I said, I don't have to. I have bread. I'll take the piece of bread and I'll eat it and I won't die. So I hid it for that purpose. It was my insurance policy. But I hid it inside my shirt. And in the middle of the night, rats came and ate it all. I didn't even taste it. But they didn't touch me. That's another miracle. I could have been bitten by them. I could have been scratched by them. Only my clothing was destroyed. Not even a sign on my body. You know, they were carrying diseases. I could have died from anything, but I didn't.
Are there any other small acts of defiance that you engaged in over your years there? Whether it was hiding the bread or any sort of secrets you kept or ways that you maintained?
It was only in my mind. A child can't do anything. I was with my mother still, and they called us out for appel, the counting. And I remember it was so uncomfortable. I think it was a very hot day. It was so uncomfortable. Hours and hours of standing and being counted. And I was in the front. I usually try to be in the back. I was the only child. And I ended up in the front somehow. And I stupidly turned around a little bit because I was fidgeting after 4 or 5 hours of standing still, when a female Gestapo, I know for years people told me there were no females. I didn't agree. I said, I know what I saw. She had a skirt on. So then I looked it up on the internet. Yes, there were females, not many, but they were. And they were vicious. That's what the internet said. So she took me out of line and she started hitting me. And I remember my thoughts. I said, and I didn't cry. My mother taught me never to cry. And I said, I had my head up. I had to, because she was tall and she was hitting my cheeks. And I remember I said to myself, okay, kill me. You can kill me all, you can hit me and hit me and hit me until I die. You will never know how much it hurts. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction that she's hurting me. Her hands were all red. She hit me with open hand like that. And my cheeks were all swollen. Not a sound came out, not a tear. Then she pushed me back into line and she said, next time you stand still. She could have killed me easily. And when she left, she went to another group. I remember heaving, but tears came without a sound. Not a sound. I went back to the barracks, and I was still, I was unable to calm myself, but without a single sound. You know, that's a type of a defiance. Maybe. What could I do?
What else do you remember about the ways that the Nazi soldiers spoke to and treated you?
There was very little contact. The Nazis were very up there. They were the, you know, it was the people who took care of us, or can't really say care, who were in charge of us. About standing still and being clean enough. So, I mean, taking the feces out of your bed if you made it night or whatever. Very rough, very tough. And I don't remember any direct speaking to me, but I remember my mother interpreted for me, like she would say, take off your clothes. I didn't even hear the order. I don't even know what language it was in. It's not the speaking. Children we were just waiting to die. We weren't given orders. We weren't anything. We were just garbage to be gotten rid of as quickly as possible. I mean, even when we were in the, we went to the crematorium. They addressed us. They didn't address us. They told us to get undressed. It was an announcement. I don't remember what language it was in. And they told us to make sure we know where we put our clothes because we'll come back. We're taking a shower. We knew it wasn't a shower. We knew that. But I'm not sure I knew what was happening inside the door with a little window. I saw it, but I didn't know. So we waited outside and waited. And I saw them screaming and yelling at each other. People, And then they told us to get dressed. I don't know what happened that day.
Do you remember any small acts of kindness that people displayed towards you?
No.
Whether it was
No, I wasn't
caretakers or
lucky
other
enough.
children?
Except the nice woman who tattooed me. I really knew at 5.5 that she was unhappy to do that. No, I don't remember any. I wasn't with any adults except my mother. Oh, maybe, wait a minute. It's interesting. When I fell into the latrine, up to my neck almost, my mother had trouble getting me out. I had no hair. I had very skimpy clothes. She couldn't get me. The other women helped her. That I remember. I forgot about that, you know. They helped. And then someone got a hose, and they hosed me down. Yeah, there was. They helped my mother to get me out.
Certainly no one is responsible for being a victim of the Nazis, but were there any characteristics that you think helped a person survive in those circumstances?
A lot of 95% was luck. Where you were that time. Another way, I think, hope was a big thing in helping you continue. Hope that you will see the family again. People were under delusion. My mother was. She said, oh, you will see your family. I have so many brothers and sisters. You're going to have such a wonderful time. You think you're an only child? You may be, but you will see what a real family is like. She was under delusion. Nobody came. So that kept her going throughout the worst time. And when she saw there was nobody left, she died. Very simply, she died. She died in America. Life wasn't worth living. So I think people, number one, people who had hope, people who were with family members. I know personally of people, like one woman was with her sister. They kept each other going. Family and relationship inside these terrible conditions was one factor that kept you going. That's why They wouldn't let you stay long together. They would move you around so you don't have any relationships. They knew that. They were very smart psychologically. That's why they were such great killers. They understood that. The Germans used their best minds, educated people. They knew that if you keep a group together for too long, they may have relationships with each other and they may be a revolt. If you move them around all over and you never know, my mother never knew where her family was. You couldn't write letters, you couldn't listen to radio, you didn't know anything, you couldn't have any contact. I think people who had some contact with each other in some way, even if they weren't related, but were friends, made it much better. Psychologically could live longer.
Were there any moments in particular when you thought your own death was inevitable?
All the time. It was just a matter of when. I thought that being Jewish, you die. It went together. Child, being Jewish, and death was like one word. It was like, it's like kids now know when they're 5.5, or whatever, they go to kindergarten. Then they go to first, it's accepted. They know when they'll be going to kindergarten. So they anticipate their birthday, so they know they're going to be, that's how it was with me. I knew exactly. As soon as I didn't know the year or when, all they had to do was find me. And that's it. Or I was part of a selection of a group. They were ready to take the kids. I'm among the kids. I thought at any moment, I will be dead.
What was your understanding of death at that age?
I know that death is you just don't come back, wherever it is. I would like to ask you what your understanding of death. And you're an educated adult American. Human beings have a very hard time understanding death, right? Priests, rabbis, we don't know what that is. As a child, I knew it meant to get rid of the people, to get them away from this earth and not come back. That's what I thought. That's what really death is. It was a matter of how and when. That's all. And I watched people die all the time. A dead body was as normal as somebody passing a flower in a garden.
What do you remember about the day you were taken to the crematorium?
They gave us a delicious breakfast, which was the best. I didn't care about I knew we were going because the barrack before that went a few days before. I knew the kids disappeared. I knew where they went, but I didn't care because I was going to eat. I told you, the only thing on earth was food. What comes after I eat? I didn't care. It was something soft, something delicious, something sweet, delicious stuff. And we ate, and then we got dressed. I was very cold. I didn't have gloves. So I went to the next barrack, because I knew the kids weren't there, to look for gloves. And I found a coat hanging, and there were gloves inside the pocket. And I was going to take them to use them. And then you know what I said to myself? I was 6. I said, I'm not touching those gloves. That little girl is never going to come back anymore. I don't want to have those gloves. See, instead of saying she'll come back for them, I shouldn't take the gloves. She won't come back anymore. So therefore, I shouldn't touch them. I had a feeling that she was killed. I knew. And I wasn't going to benefit by it. So I was no gloves. We went, we walked, and I remember we were passing the women. I didn't even know they were there. And my mother's calling by my name. She's calling me. Where are you going? I could recognize her voice. I said, oh, my mother, because who knows my name? Nobody calls me by my name. And I said, to the crematorium. And everybody was screaming because the women had children in the same group. They were screaming and crying. And I turned to the little girl next to me because we had partners. And I said, why are they crying? Every Jewish child goes to the crematorium. That's what I said to her. And then we walked, and then we came back because they told us to come back. And I remember it was dark already. We went and there was light. Coming back, it was dark. And I hear voices again. What happened? What's going on? And I said to my mom, I heard a voice. They couldn't do it this time. They'll take us next time. Just like that. Like as if nothing, that's the way it's supposed to be. Just next time. I wasn't elated. I wasn't happy. It was, when you grow up like that and you know nothing else, even horror becomes normal, right? In fact, after the war, when I came to America, and I realized that they were children who ate in regular beds and slept and had food and parties while I was in Auschwitz, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. I said, I didn't say this to them. I just thought to myself, she was playing piano while I was starving in Auschwitz. How is that possible?
And how did you eventually reunite with your father? What a miracle that he survived.
Oh, that's
as well.
about much later. We stayed quite a bit in Auschwitz. We didn't know where to go until the Russians became very difficult to be with. Soldiers, in the beginning, they loved us, and they did love us. It was the first time I ever tasted bread and soup, and we could eat, and we could be free, and we could walk around Auschwitz, and then they became they were drunk a lot. And there was a lot of rape going on. And I remember we couldn't sleep anymore. And I couldn't understand it. My mother said, sleep in your clothes. I said, why? She said, because we may have to run. I said, run where? I thought these are our friends. What do you mean run? So she said, didn't want to tell me what. But one night, we were in a barrack sleeping when I was in my clothes. She woke me up and she said, we got to get out of this barrack. So I did. And we hid behind something. And I couldn't get it. I said, I thought these are our liberators. What is this? And after that, shortly, we had to leave. And that's also when the Red Cross came and gave us a pass. And we went, long story how we got back to our hometown and what we did there. We had no place to eat. It was a very difficult time going back with my mother's at home. Nobody was there, no family. And then within about a year, my father came because Dachau was liberated much later by the Americans. So he came much later. And then whatever family was left, you're going to laugh, right? The irony of life. We had to sneak out of Poland to go to Germany in order to reach the Americans. We wanted to reach Americans. We didn't know how. The Russians were everywhere, communists. So we got into Germany and we went to the American sector in Berlin. That's how I got my first chewing gum, which I swallowed.
So why did your family decide to come to the United States? What did America mean to you?
Well, I'll tell you. I had an aunt in America. Had come earlier. She knew she had a relative that vouched for her. And I had an aunt in Israel. We basically, in the beginning, wanted to go to Israel because we had enough of discrimination and Jew, and it was so difficult in Poland. But my aunt in Israel said, don't come. You can't suffer again. There is no food in Israel. Terrible physical conditions. Go where you can at least start healing somewhere. And then the Americans, the soldiers that were part of our DP camp, were extraordinarily nice. I mean, it's my first chocolate, my first orange. They were like fabulous. And we said, we have to go where we were accepted more, where we accepted, not like Europe. Europe was even beginning to be anti-Semitic then even. Too many refugees, too many homeless. Who needs those people? You know, refugees are not loved anywhere. But America promised it would be completely different. And of course, then they found that I had TB. So Americans did not want to accept me until I was healed. And then it was smooth sailing, as they say, on a ship.
So you eventually went on to study psychology and Black literature before embarking on a career as a therapist. Tell me how you came to choose that path for your studies.
Well,
and your
I didn't
life.
do that right away. That's my second career. I did this at the age of 40. Before that, I studied Black literature because I believed, I and my husband both believed that since we were part of the minority and we had such terrible, well, he didn't, he was an American, but he was very in tune with all of this, that we should live among people that we feel could use our help in some way. So he moved into an all-Black Harlem neighborhood, and we were there for 7 years. And he got his PhD, and I got my master's, and I really felt I wanted to teach Black literature, which they said I shouldn't. I remember my professor said, what does a nice Jewish girl know about Black experience? I said, I may not know about specific Black experience, but I get it. I get their experience. So he let me get my master's. It was very interesting. And then we lived in Israel for many years. And when I came back here, I said, I must do something that is going to be meaningful to me. And that's how I started, became a therapist.
And did you ever do therapy yourself?
Oh, I did, yes, absolutely. After my mother died and my father left for Israel, I was sort of homeless for about 4 years until I got married. And I met this fabulous woman. By the way, after reading my book, her children called me, Dr. Lillian Kaplan. And she was my therapist for a long time, to try to figure out this whole war situation and my mother's death, just everything. And I said to myself, I want to do this for other people. Yeah.
And what did you learn about yourself during those therapy sessions?
First of all, I learned that we all have a lot of strengths, and that we can heal, and that we can heal enough to help others heal. I really think that humanity is very strong. It's not always tested. And if we're tested, we'll make it. I tell it to kids who are have incest, victim of incest, victims of other things, divorce, of rape, or just issues, teenage issues. And I always say, you can make it. Human beings are built to have resilience. That's how we were made. But you have to feed that resilience. You can't just, it's like a garden. You have to give it nourishment to that resilience, and you'll make it. Look at what all the Holocaust survivors have done. They built Israel. Many of them are very charitable. They built schools. They gave money to, they rebuilt families. People who lost everything became fathers and mothers again, second time around.
Do you ever have a sense of survivor's guilt?
No. I have survivor's obligation. I don't know if you, see, depends how you, it's just words. No, I feel that that maybe that's why I'm so driven and I still work at 85, because my obligation is to do something with the years I've been given. I'm grateful that I have these years. And I can't just sit and watch television or something. No, I'm grateful that I have these years. And I should put them to good use. I should talk about those who have been killed, innocent children, just because they were Jewish. I like to do both. I like to remember them. So we should never forget the 6 million who were just destroyed for no reason. Well, the world was quiet. And it's also a warning. If we allow anti-Semitism to flourish, or any kind of hatred, any kind, against any kind of people, against if your color is different, or your sexual orientation is different, or your thoughts are different, I don't know. If we allow hatred and it's not checked, it's going to be like a cancer cell that gets spread and kills the whole body. We will lose our people. I was just in Africa. They poached, they killed the rhinos. Can you imagine, out of thousands of rhinos, there are 2 left? Human destruction.
You've referred a couple of times to your mother's death in the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of what happened there?
My mother, first of all, when she realized that none of her family was coming back, she went into a serious depression. And it lasted for a very long time. And we didn't have, at that time, there wasn't help for trauma. It wasn't, the 50s, the 60s they were not cognizant of trauma. So she was very, very depressed. And then one day she said she had a headache and she went to sleep and she never woke up. And I don't know about that. They didn't have an autopsy, so I really don't know. They didn't do it at that time. It was in 1957. But she was hit in the head by stealing a potato. So maybe it was connected, but I don't know.
You and your husband were married for 60 years.
Right.
Tell me how you met and fell in love.
Well, I was a few weeks in America. I was not even 12 yet. And my mother sent me to this Hebrew school because she wanted me, with all things that happened, she wanted to be a proud Jew. She didn't want me to cover it up. She didn't want me to forget who I was. And I met him there. He was 12. We were the same age. He was 9 months older. And he was the only one who spoke Yiddish. I didn't speak English. And I remember there was like a lunch period. I didn't know what that was. And he took me by my hand and he took me to a drugstore at the time. Because at that time, drugstores had food. There was a counter. You could get ice cream and soda and sandwiches. So he bought me a cheese sandwich. And I say to myself, I'm going to marry him. Just like that. When I went home and I told my mother I just met my husband, she thought I was crazy. She didn't even answer. I felt at home. I've been through so many places and felt such a alienation on this earth. Poland was a nightmare after the war. Everything, my mother's depression, the death of all the families. I was living in a nightmare, and I met him, and he seemed like he had a big family. He told me about his family. I never heard of people having grandparents. And it just felt, and he spoke a beautiful Yiddish because they spoke Yiddish in his house. His grandparents spoke Yiddish. And he was very, very smart. He was already, I think, in high school when I could barely make, grammar school. Only 1 year apart. And I said, he's all the positive that I don't have. The stability, the family, the Judaism, the language. Can you imagine being able to talk to somebody when I couldn't talk to anybody except my parents?
So earlier you were talking to us a bit about his sudden illness. I know this is probably still a bit fresh, but would you tell us a bit about that story?
One thing, he didn't believe in doctors. He had a PhD in biochemistry. He thought he knew a lot about, I don't know. And apparently, I just found a beautiful letter from my doctor. He didn't even have a doctor. And apparently he had acute leukemia, but nobody knew, and he didn't know. And by the time he realized that he was sick, he had a few days left to live. I don't know. We thought he had COVID. There was the first week of COVID, the very first week. And the doctor called. He said, no, take him home. He doesn't have COVID. He's got a few days to live. Let him die at home. It was the biggest shock of my life. Die at home? What do you mean, die? What do you mean? He said, I'm sorry to tell you. We took his blood test. There is nothing there. It's all gone. And he died at home a few days later with all the kids around in his own bed, in his sleep. And I got a beautiful letter. I just read it today. I'm going to frame it, in fact. It's so beautiful. Who said it was a blessed death. Everybody would love to die in their own bed, surrounded by family and friends.
You also had children of your own. How and when did you eventually tell them the story of your life
Right
and
away.
survival?
Right, as soon as they ask. My children, my grandchildren, as soon as I see my number, I don't tell them. I tell them as they get ready. First, I tell a 3-year-old, yeah, I did. Why did you write this on your head? You're not supposed to write. I said, yes, I didn't. Bad people did it to me. And as they get older, they know more and more and more until they know as much as I do. And then I took them to, many of them came with me to Auschwitz to say the prayer over the ashes. And they saw the cattle car. And they come with me to speaking. I make my children and grandchildren part of my life so that when I'm not here, they will continue.
So speaking of your grandchildren, one of the reasons we're here today, one of the reasons I came to know your story is because of a little website called TikTok that I understand your grandchild introduced you to. Tell me the story behind your TikTok.
I was having dinner in his house. And it was Friday night dinner, Shabbat dinner. And he said, do you have 2 minutes after dinner? Of course. So he said, I'm going to ask you a few questions. And it's something called TikTok. I didn't know what that was because my daughter works for TikTok, I think. No, Tic-Tac, the candy company. And I said, why would a candy company be interested in the Holocaust? I never heard of that platform. And then he said, oh, so he asked me a few questions. He said, it'll only be 2 minutes because those, they're very short attention span. But don't expect anybody to even ask you questions. I said, who's going to ask me questions? I didn't know it was interactive even. And then the next day he said, 20 people called, 50 people, 100 people. I said, really? 1,000 people? I said, really? He said, yes, Savta, that's Hebrew for grandma. They're interested, so we'll do it. At one time he had 50 million watching my number.
Why does it matter to you so much to tell these stories? What is the importance of storytelling in your life?
Storytelling is who we are. Human beings can only, there was a time where people couldn't read or write, and storytelling was the way they give history. All the books that you have started with storytelling. And I'm telling the story in order not to be forgotten. It's true, now we have books and internet and all that stuff, but there's nothing like a real story. It has a terrific emotional effect, much more than the written word. The reason that Hitler was so successful because he was a great storyteller. He was a great speaker. And that taught me a lot also. I want to be a speaker so that the people will hear me and have an effect. And I want my grandchildren to do the same. So I speak anytime somebody wants me to. Very important not to forget those who aren't here anymore by telling their story, because they're not here to tell it.
What is the main lesson you've wanted to convey to your children and grandchildren about your experience?
I think I said two things, just very. Remember, this is part of your history, if you're Jewish or if you're not, even if you're just human being. This is what happened if we're not careful. Remember those, the innocent people. Remember the destruction of innocence on this earth. Number one. Number two, be more cognizant of your environment. Your environment. Because by not seeing and not listening and not caring, this what may happen. Got to be awake, to see what's going on. That's the third thing is, which maybe is the last, is that I guess hope. I see hope for humanity. I see positive things, but we have to work at it. I want to tell you a little story which I sort of like. A grandson asked his grandfather, "Tell me about your feelings about things," he says to his grandfather. The grandfather said, I always have two feelings. One is good and one is bad. One is kind and the other one is mean. And the grandson said, "Which one wins?" And the grandfather said, "The one you feed." So you have to feed the good side of you. It really feels very important, and on every level.
So have you formed community with any other survivors over the years?
Yeah, I do. First of all, I used to be in touch with the survivors from my hometown, but nobody's left. Two of us are left. I feel like I'm almost a sole survivor of the whole, a representative, not a survivor, a representative of my town, except second and third generation, like my grandchildren would be speaking. And I also go to Auschwitz with the survivors. We had a fabulous 75th a gathering for the liberation of Auschwitz, 75 years in Poland. But what made it wonderful was the people who came, they came from all over. the survivors, with families. They came with crutches, they came in wheelchairs, but they all came with the same feeling. We made it. And there's hope that we rebuilt our lives. We never forget, but we will never give up. I think that made me feel very good. Talked about food, about the wonderful things, how their life is, and you watch people who've seen their children being murdered in front of them, have rebuilt their lives. They have other children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. It was an extraordinarily positive experience. And I think the resiliency of people is just, it's to me, it's extremely uplifting. Otherwise, I couldn't get up in the morning.
How do you see anti-Semitism continuing to manifest in the world and in your own life, even to this day?
I see anti-Semitism as ignorance, and I sort of want to embrace them and say, come, you hate me, let's have a meal, let's talk. I think it's a scapegoat of unhappy people. I think every time you will see a group of skinheads or really anti-Semites, you'll talk about their own lives. You will see they come from broken homes. They come from a background of misery. And they want to find a reason, and it's easily found somewhere. It's because of this. Hitler said, our country is in terrible condition because the Jews took our jobs. We'll get rid of them and we'll have all our job back. We'll have prosperity. Same thing. A content, happy person will not be an anti-Semite. He may not know Jews. He may not necessarily like them, but he's not going to want them to see dead. So we have to look around and see who are those people and work with them.
Talk to us a little bit about the importance of family in your life.
Family has been the most important thing in my life because Hitler wanted to kill our religion, our continuity, our people. In fact, I wanted 6 children, one for every million that was killed. But I stopped at 4. But now I'm very happy. I have 8 grandchildren. They all are very proud of being Jewish. They're educated Jews. They've been to Israel. They're going to continue my story. All of them, all 8, know the story. And I know that they will continue, and they come with me, not whoever is available when I travel and I talk. So I think it's been, I did, when Hitler said, let's kill the Jews, I said, I'll have as many kids as I can. Get rid of the religion. Not mine. They're going to be very Jewish. Some of them speak Hebrew. And it's sort of an oppositional, like I'm trying to undo what he tried to do. And it's very meaningful to me. It's not just a theory, That's why this is so important in my life. It's if I'm vindicated, I'm here. And I am not just a survivor, but I'm thriving in a way. And I don't have survivor's guilt. I have something else which is new in psychology, but I had it before they wrote about it. Survivor's growth. I feel like I'm still fighting, for our right, our people, us.